In 1970, something about how families approached breakfast was fundamentally different from today. The ingredients were similar, but 7 specific habits have completely vanished from American mornings. The health consequences are staggering. Most families in the early 70s had something we've almost completely lost today: time. Not the frantic, coffee-chugging, granola bar in the car kind of morning we know now, but actual sit-down breakfast time. Your typical family gathered around the kitchen table while mom cracked eggs into a pan and dad read yesterday's newspaper. Kids weren't rushing to catch buses with Pop-Tarts hanging from their mouths. They sat down, used actual plates, and ate food that required chewing. Revolutionary concept, right? The whole idea of grabbing breakfast on the go was practically unheard of. Fast food joints barely existed, and the ones that did weren't open at 7 in the morning serving Egg McMuffins. McDonald's was still figuring out lunch, let alone breakfast. People cooked at home because that's where breakfast happened. Period. Family breakfasts weren't some Norman Rockwell fantasy either. They were just normal. Parents could keep an eye on what everyone was eating because everyone was eating the same thing, in the same place, at the same time. Makes sense, right? Hard to overeat when your mother's watching you pile on the bacon. Then there's the cooking part. Morning routines actually included turning on the stove. Women, and yes, it was mostly women back then, would wake up early enough to scramble eggs, flip pancakes, or stir oatmeal. Not because they were trying to win some domestic goddess award, but because that's what breakfast was. Food you cooked. The weird part is how the simple setup solved problems we're still struggling with today. When you sit down to eat, you naturally pay more attention to how much food you're putting away. You can't mindlessly shovel cereal into your mouth while driving when you're having a conversation with your family about the weather or complaining about homework. Eating together created built-in portion control without anyone even thinking about it. Plates had edges, bowls had bottoms, and when you finished what was on them, breakfast was over. No grabbing handfuls of this or that on your way out the door. No stopping at convenience stores for a second breakfast because the first one didn't fill you up. Morning meals had boundaries. Physical ones, like sitting in a chair at a table. Time ones, like finishing before dad left for work. Social ones, like waiting for everyone to be served before you started eating. But here's what really made the difference. The food itself was completely different from what fills our grocery stores today. The ingredients, the processing, even the basic building blocks of breakfast had nothing in common with the sugar-loaded, chemical-enhanced products lining today's cereal aisles. That transformation didn't happen overnight, and understanding exactly what changed helps explain why our waistlines followed suit. Walking into a grocery store in 1972 felt completely different from today. The cereal aisle didn't stretch for half a mile with fluorescent boxes screaming about marshmallow explosions or chocolate chip cookie flavors. Instead, you'd find maybe 10 varieties of cereal, Tops, cornflakes, Cheerios, Rice Krispies, done. Real eggs came from chickens, not a carton filled with liquid something or other that promised to taste like eggs but never quite delivered. Milk was milk, whole, maybe 2% if you were feeling fancy. None of this almond, oat, coconut, or cashew business that crowds today's dairy sections like a botanical convention. The ingredient lists on packages were refreshingly short. Bread contained flour, water, yeast, salt, and maybe sugar. That's it. You could pronounce every single word without a chemistry degree. No high fructose corn syrup hiding in places it had no business being, like bread or supposedly healthy granola bars. Butter was butter. Bacon was bacon. People ate these foods without apocalyptic warnings about trans fats or artificial preservatives because, well, most foods didn't have them yet. The industrial food complex hadn't fully figured out how to pump everything full of chemicals designed to make you crave more. Then there's the fascinating absence of diet culture madness. Sure, people watched their weight, but breakfast aisles weren't lined with products screaming 0 calories or sugar-free in fonts designed to trigger panic purchases. The concept of diet breakfast bars wrapped in shiny packages promising to replace actual meals was still years away from invading American kitchens. Fresh fruit meant seasonal fruit. Strawberries in winter? Good luck with that. Apples, bananas, and oranges dominated fruit bowls because they were what actually grew and shipped well without requiring a small pharmacy of preservatives to survive the journey from farm to table. Oatmeal came in plain varieties, not packets loaded with enough sugar to qualify as dessert. You added your own honey, brown sugar, or fruit. Revolutionary concept, right? People controlled what went into their bodies instead of letting food scientists in distant laboratories make those decisions for them. The processed food revolution was just getting started, but it hadn't reached full steam yet. Most breakfast foods still resembled their original forms rather than laboratory creations designed to hit specific bliss points that keep people coming back for more. Food companies were in the business of selling food, not engineering addictive flavor combinations that would make people crave products at neurological levels. Marketing budgets focused on simple messages about taste and nutrition rather than creating psychological dependencies. But here's where things get interesting about how people actually prepared and ate these simpler ingredients. The cooking methods and daily routines around breakfast created something modern families rarely experience anymore. Bread back then wasn't the spongy white stuff that bounces when you drop it. Most families bought loaves made from whole grains that actually had substance. You could taste the wheat, feel the texture, and it didn't turn into paste in your mouth after 3 chews. Well, that's because bakers weren't trying to make bread that could survive a nuclear winter on store shelves. The weird part is how sweeteners worked in the 70s. Jam came from actual fruit that someone had cooked down with sugar. Honey dripped from jars that grandmothers kept in their pantries for decades. High fructose corn syrup? Nobody even knew what that was yet. When people wanted something sweet on their toast, they used ingredients their great-grandmothers would have recognized. Makes sense, right? Then there's the cereal situation. Boxes were smaller, portions were reasonable, and sugar wasn't the main ingredient hiding behind fancy marketing names. Kids got a small bowl of cereal that might have had some sweetness, but it wasn't like eating candy for breakfast. The sugar content was so much lower that today's cereals would have seemed like dessert to 70s families. Parents actually read the short ingredient lists and could pronounce everything on them. Fresh fruit at breakfast meant whatever grew nearby or could survive a reasonable trip to the store. Bananas, apples, maybe some oranges, if you were lucky. But people weren't flying in exotic berries from 3 continents away or expecting strawberries in December. Seasonal eating wasn't a trendy diet choice. It was just reality. Your fruit came from places you could actually point to on a map without squinting. Let's not forget the herbs that gave food its personality. Families grew parsley in little pots on windowsills. Chives sprouted in backyard gardens next to the tomatoes. Fresh basil meant you either grew it yourself or knew someone who did. These weren't fancy ingredients from specialty stores. They were just normal ways to make eggs taste better or add some life to a simple breakfast. Everything tasted like what it was supposed to taste like. Butter tasted like cream. Eggs tasted like eggs. Nobody was trying to create artificial flavors that mimicked real food because real food was still affordable and available. The whole food industry hadn't yet figured out how to make synthetic versions of natural flavors and convince people they were better. But why did this matter for staying slim? When your taste buds could actually detect real flavors, you didn't need as much food to feel satisfied. Your brain got clear signals about what you were eating instead of being confused by artificial tastes and textures. Natural ingredients worked with your body's hunger signals rather than against them. However, even the best ingredients don't matter much if you don't know what to do with them. When your grandmother woke up in 1972, she didn't reach for a breakfast bar or pop something in the microwave. She walked to the kitchen and actually cooked. Wild concept, right? The whole idea of heating up pre-made meals for breakfast wasn't even on most people's radar yet. Back then, cooking from scratch wasn't some trendy lifestyle choice. It was just Tuesday morning. People cracked real eggs into actual pans. They stirred oatmeal on the stove, watching it bubble and thicken. No instant packets loaded with artificial flavors and enough sodium to de-ice a sidewalk. Just oats, water, maybe some milk, and whatever sweetener they had lying around. The recipes families used were refreshingly simple. Take scrambled eggs, butter, salt, pepper, done. You could pronounce every ingredient without a chemistry degree. Compare that to today's breakfast products, where you need a translator just to understand what you're eating. Sodium aluminum phosphate, anyone? But here's where it gets interesting. Savory breakfasts dominated the morning scene. People filled hollowed-out tomatoes with eggs and baked them. They made grits with cheese. They fried up leftover potatoes with onions. Sweet wasn't the default breakfast flavor like it is now. Your taste buds weren't getting hijacked by sugar first thing in the morning. Hot cereal was king. And we're not talking about those little packets that turn into sugary paste when you add water. Real oatmeal took 15 minutes to cook properly. Cream of wheat required constant stirring. Grits needed patience and practice to get right. The weird part is people actually had time for this. Morning routines weren't built around shaving every possible second off breakfast prep. Then there's the whole exotic food situation. Croissants existed, sure, but they lived in fancy hotel dining rooms and upscale cafes downtown. Regular families weren't buying frozen croissants at the grocery store or grabbing them from drive-through windows. French pastries were special occasion food, not Tuesday morning fuel. The cooking methods themselves kept portions reasonable. When you're standing at the stove making oatmeal for 4 people, you naturally measure out sensible amounts. You can't accidentally pour yourself a mixing bowl full of cereal when you're cooking everything individually. The process itself acted as portion control. Most families owned basic kitchen equipment. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, a decent skillet, some pots, wooden spoons that had seen better days, but they knew how to use what they had. Cooking wasn't intimidating because it wasn't overthought. This hands-on approach to breakfast did something important that most people don't realize. It connected families to their food in ways that disappeared later. But what happened next changed everything about how Americans thought about morning meals. The shift toward convenience was about to reshape breakfast forever, and the portions that came with it would surprise everyone. The 1970s had a secret weapon against overeating that nobody talks about anymore. Bowl sizes, plate sizes, even cup sizes were dramatically smaller than what we use today. Walk into any vintage diner or check out your grandmother's china set, and you'll notice something immediately. Those dishes look like they belong in a dollhouse compared to modern tableware. Here's the thing about smaller dishes. They automatically controlled portions without anyone thinking about it. When your cereal bowl held maybe 6 ounces instead of today's massive 16-ounce soup bowls masquerading as breakfast dishes, you simply couldn't pour yourself a mountain of sugar-coated flakes. The physics wouldn't allow it. Makes sense, right? But portion control went way beyond just dish size. Most people ate exactly what was served and called it done. Second helpings at breakfast, that was reserved for special occasions or Sunday mornings when nobody had anywhere urgent to go. The idea of going back for more eggs or another slice of toast felt almost greedy to many families. Then there's the drink situation. Water was the standard breakfast beverage for most kids, maybe accompanied by a small glass of plain milk. Those giant tumblers filled with orange juice that we see today would have seemed wasteful and unnecessary. Juice was often saved for special occasions or when someone felt under the weather. Flavored milk drinks and those sugar-packed juice boxes hadn't invaded breakfast tables yet, keeping liquid calories to an absolute minimum. Well, let's talk about yogurt for a second. If families ate yogurt at all, it came in small containers and tasted pretty much like thick, tangy milk. No cookie crumbles on top, no artificial strawberry chunks floating around, no candy pieces mixed in. Plain yogurt with maybe a drizzle of honey was considered fancy. The dessert-like yogurts that fill entire supermarket aisles today would have confused people back then. Is this breakfast or ice cream? And the weird part is how this smaller portion approach extended to everything on the breakfast table. Toast came in normal-sized slices from regular loaves of bread, not those thick Texas toast slabs. Pancakes were maybe 4 inches across, not dinner plate-sized monsters. Even bacon strips were thinner and shorter than the massive strips we see today. The psychology behind this was simple but powerful. When your plate looked full with smaller amounts, your brain registered satisfaction faster. Nobody felt deprived because everyone's portions were similar. There wasn't this constant comparison to supersized portions that make normal amounts look stingy. This natural portion control created a foundation that made the rest of their breakfast choices even more effective. But controlling portions was just one piece of the puzzle. Where that food actually came from made an equally important difference in how it affected their bodies. Fresh produce didn't travel thousands of miles before landing on breakfast tables back then. Most fruits and vegetables came from local farms within a 50-mile radius. Your morning apple likely grew in the same state where you lived, maybe even the same county. Bananas were exotic enough that kids got excited about them, and strawberries in January? That wasn't happening unless you lived in Florida or California. Local sourcing meant something completely different in the 70s. The milkman still made rounds in many neighborhoods, delivering fresh bottles right to your doorstep. Those glass bottles weren't just charming. They kept milk colder and fresher than the plastic jugs we know today. Bread came from the neighborhood bakery or local grocery store, baked that morning or the night before. None of this week-old stuff shipped from industrial plants 3 states away. Then there's the fascinating reality of limited preservation methods. Food companies couldn't pump everything full of chemicals to keep it fresh for months on end. Preservatives existed, but not like today's laboratory creations. Your breakfast ingredients had actual expiration dates that mattered. Milk went sour after a week. Bread got moldy if you left it too long. This forced families to buy smaller quantities and use everything quickly. Home refrigeration was basic compared to modern standards. Most families had one small refrigerator with a tiny freezer compartment that barely held ice cubes and maybe some frozen vegetables. No massive side-by-side units with enough space to store food for a month. This limitation actually worked in people's favor. They bought fresh ingredients every few days instead of stockpiling processed foods. Local shops knew their customers by name and often their breakfast preferences too. The grocer might save the best tomatoes for Mrs. Johnson because she always bought them for her weekend breakfast. Seasonal eating wasn't a trendy movement. It was just how things worked. You ate peaches in summer, apples in fall, and citrus in winter if you were lucky enough to live somewhere warm. But here's the weird part about this simpler supply chain. Food actually tasted better. Tomatoes that ripened on the vine before traveling 10 miles taste completely different from ones picked green and artificially ripened after crossing the country. Eggs from local chickens had bright orange yolks that made morning scrambles look almost neon. Fresh herbs came from backyard gardens, not plastic packages from industrial greenhouses. The shorter distance between farm and table meant fewer middlemen, lower costs, and ingredients that retained more of their original nutritional value. No one worried about where their food came from because they usually knew exactly where it came from. This direct connection between source and stomach created a completely different breakfast experience. Yet even with all these natural advantages working in their favor, people in the 70s had developed eating habits and priorities that amplified these benefits in ways most of us have completely forgotten about today. People back then ate breakfast with a completely different mindset. Food wasn't entertainment or a reward for getting out of bed. It was fuel, plain and simple. You ate eggs and toast because your body needed energy to work in the garden, walk to school, or handle whatever the day threw at you. The idea of eating sugary cereal because it made you happy, that wasn't really a thing yet. But here's where it gets interesting. Kids spent most of their free time outside, not parked in front of screens, for hours. They rode bikes, climbed trees, played pickup games in the street until their parents called them home for dinner. All that movement meant they burned off their breakfast naturally without thinking about it. No guilt, no counting calories, just living. Television commercials were different too. Sure, they advertised food, but not with the same relentless push we see today. You might see one cereal commercial during Saturday morning cartoons, not 15 different breakfast products promising to make your morning magical or boost your energy to superhero levels. The marketing machine was smaller, quieter, less demanding. Then there's the health food movement that was just starting to take shape. When people talked about healthy breakfast options, they meant things like granola, whole grain bread, or fresh fruit, not protein bars packed with mysterious ingredients or green smoothies with 40 different superfoods. Granola was revolutionary enough. Simple oats, nuts, maybe some honey. That was considered cutting-edge health food. And the weird part is how this simpler approach actually worked. People weren't obsessing over whether their breakfast had enough antioxidants or if their oatmeal was gluten-free. They just ate real food, moved their bodies throughout the day, and somehow managed to stay healthier without all the complicated rules we follow now. The morning routine itself set a different pace for everything that followed. Starting the day by cooking, sitting down, eating without distractions, maybe talking to family members, created a calm foundation. No rushing around with a granola bar in one hand and coffee in the other, checking phones and already stressed before leaving the house. Well, what happened to change all this? The shift didn't happen overnight, but when it did happen, it was dramatic. Food companies discovered that convenience sold better than nutrition. Marketing budgets exploded. Screen time replaced outdoor play. Breakfast became just another product to sell, not a simple meal to prepare. Makes sense why people stayed thinner back then, right? They weren't trying to hack their metabolism or find the perfect superfood. They just followed patterns that naturally supported their health without making it complicated. Sometimes the old ways work better than we want to admit. The simplicity of those 70s breakfasts might seem boring compared to today's endless options, but maybe boring was exactly what our bodies needed.